I don't like thinking about that night, but sometimes it creeps in whether I want it to or not. The smell of damp wood, the sound of something moving just beyond the tree line, the feeling of cold air creeping in through the cracks in the cabin walls. It all lingers in my mind like a sickness I can't shake. I never believed in nightmares when I was awake. I do now. I rented the cabin for a weekend. I needed a break, just a few days away from people, noise, and the constant pull of responsibilities. The place was deep in the woods, tucked away from the main roads. There was no Wi-Fi, no cell service, just a landline in case of emergencies. That's what I wanted, just me, the trees, and the silence. It was an old structure, small but sturdy. The wood was worn from decades of harsh weather, but it still stood solid. A single bedroom, a tiny bathroom, a kitchen, and a living area. The furniture was basic: a couch, a table, and a couple of chairs. There was a wood-burning stove in the corner, and that was the only heat source. The cabin came with a small shed out back for firewood, and I made sure to stock up before the sun went down. The owner had warned me that temperatures dropped fast at night. I arrived in the late afternoon, parked my truck at the bottom of the long dirt path, and hiked up with my bag. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and wet leaves. The woods were still, almost unnaturally so. I didn't hear a single bird or rustling animal, just the crunch of my boots on the ground. Inside the cabin, I set my bag down, got the fire going, and settled in. The first few hours were peaceful. I read a book, made some canned soup, and sat by the fire as the light outside faded. The silence was thick, but it wasn't unsettling. Not yet. Around 9, I heard something outside, a branch snapping, then another. Not the wind, something heavier, something moving. I grabbed my flashlight, went to the window and shined it outside. Nothing, just trees and darkness. I told myself it was an animal, probably a deer. I went back to the couch, tried to ignore it, but my ears were tuned in now. Then came the footsteps, slow, deliberate, crunching through the undergrowth. They stopped just beyond the tree line. I didn't move. I barely breathed. I waited, flashlight in hand, heart pounding in my chest. After a long minute, the footsteps moved away, fading into the woods. I tried to rationalize it. A hunter, maybe, someone lost. But who the hell would be out here at this hour with no flashlight, no sign of a camp? The nearest town was miles away. My stomach twisted. I double-checked the door lock, shoved a chair under the handle just in case, and told myself to sleep. But sleep didn't come easy. Every little sound made my skin prickle. The fire burned low, casting long shadows that flickered across the walls. At some point, exhaustion took over, and I drifted off. I woke up to the sound of my truck's alarm blaring. I shot up, heart hammering, the cabin now filled with red light pulsing through the windows. I grabbed my flashlight and peered outside. The truck was at the bottom of the dirt path, lights flashing, horn blaring into the night. Something was out there. I grabbed my boots, my jacket, and my hunting knife, then hesitated. I didn't want to go outside, but I couldn't just sit here. My truck was my way out. If someone was messing with it, I needed to stop them. I stepped onto the porch, flashlight sweeping the area. The woods were still. No wind, no movement, just the shrill sound of the alarm echoing through the trees. Every step down that dirt path felt like a mistake, but I forced myself forward. When I reached the truck, I stopped. The driver's side door was open. I knew I had locked it. My breath came fast. My fingers tightened around the knife. I leaned inside, turned off the alarm, and checked the cabin. The keys were still in my bag, untouched. The seats were empty, no sign of anything. But I wasn't alone. I felt it, that unnatural weight in the air. Then I saw them, footprints, leading from the trees to my truck, then back again. Bare feet. The tracks sank deep into the mud, wide apart like whoever made them had a long stride. My stomach twisted. I turned, flashlight scanning the woods, but there was nothing, just trees and blackness. I backed away slowly, walking fast but careful, ears straining for any sound. I reached the cabin and locked the door. This time, I pushed the couch against it. The fire had burned down to embers, and I didn't dare light another one. I sat with my back to the wall, knife in my lap, and waited. The night stretched on, endless and silent. Hours passed. Then, just before dawn, I heard it again. A single, slow footstep on the porch. Not moving, just standing. I held my breath, gripping the knife so hard my knuckles ached. The wood creaked under the weight, then scraping. A slow, deliberate drag of something across the wooden planks. A nail, a knife, I don't know. I sat frozen, every nerve screaming at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. Then, just as the first light of dawn began creeping through the trees, the sound stopped. I waited, 10 minutes, 20. Then I forced myself to move, inching to the window, peeking outside. Nothing. The footprints were still there, leading away from the cabin, disappearing into the woods. I didn't waste time. I grabbed my bag, my keys, and I ran for the truck. Started on the first try, and I tore down that dirt road, not stopping, not looking back. I never told anyone. What would I say? That something, watched me all night from the trees? That it walked barefoot through the freezing mud and scraped its nails across my porch? No one would believe me, but I know what I heard. I know what I saw, and I know, without a doubt, that I was never alone in those woods. I don't know why I even agreed to stay in that cabin. Maybe it was the way my friend Eric described it. Quiet, peaceful, perfect for clearing your head. I needed that. Life in the city had been suffocating me, and I was desperate to get away from the noise, the stress, the endless cycle of work and sleep. So when he told me about his uncle's old hunting cabin, tucked deep in the woods of northern Montana, I jumped at the chance. The drive there was long, the last hour spent on a dirt road that seemed like it hadn't been maintained in years. Potholes, tree roots pushing through the soil, and the occasional sharp turn kept me on edge. My SUV wasn't built for this kind of terrain, and more than once, I thought about turning back. But then I reminded myself why I was doing this. I needed the quiet, the isolation, a week away from everything. By the time I arrived, the sun was dipping below the tree line. The cabin was small, made of rough-hewn logs that looked like they'd been there for 100 years. The roof sagged slightly in one corner, and the front steps creaked under my weight as I climbed them. A single window on the front side reflected the orange glow of the setting sun. Inside, the place was just as rustic as I expected. A wood-burning stove sat in one corner, a small table with 2 chairs in another. A single cot with a thin mattress was pushed up against the back wall. There was a small kitchen area with an old propane stove and a few wooden shelves stocked with canned goods. No electricity, no running water, just a hand pump outside for drinking and washing. I set my bags down and let out a breath. This was it. A week alone, just me and the wilderness. It was supposed to be peaceful. The first night was uneventful. I built a fire in the stove, ate some canned chili, and read by the light of my battery-powered lantern. The woods outside were eerily silent, save for the occasional rustling of leaves. I told myself it was just animals, deer, maybe a raccoon, but there was something unsettling about how quiet it was. No distant hum of traffic, no voices, no background noise at all, just silence. I barely slept. Every creak of the cabin made me tense up. It wasn't fear exactly, more like a deep, nagging feeling that I wasn't supposed to be there, that the woods didn't want me there. The next day, I decided to explore. I walked for hours, following an overgrown trail that led deeper into the trees. The air was crisp, the smell of pine thick and earthy. It was beautiful, but there was still something off. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. No birds sang, no insects buzzed, just my own footsteps crunching on the forest floor. I found an old tree stand, the kind hunters used. It was falling apart, barely held together by rusted nails and rotting wood. Nearby, I saw bones, a pile of them half buried in the leaves, too big to be a deer, maybe an elk, but something had stripped them clean, left them in a neat little pile like some kind of offering. I turned back after that. The whole walk back to the cabin, I felt it again, that weight of unseen eyes, something just beyond the trees watching. I kept telling myself it was in my head, that I was just not used to being so alone. That night, I locked the door. I wedged a chair under the handle, too. I wasn't sure why, just a feeling. The fire crackled in the stove, but the warmth didn't reach the pit in my stomach. I forced myself to sleep, but it was shallow, restless. A sound woke me, a thud, heavy, right outside the cabin. I sat up, heart hammering. Another thud, like something large shifting its weight on the porch. Then slow, deliberate footsteps. I held my breath, listened. Something was out there. The doorknob rattled. I didn't move. The chair I wedged under it held. Then the knob turned again, harder this time. A long, deep exhale came from the other side of the door. Not an animal. Something bigger, heavier. It was testing the door. I reached for the hunting knife I'd brought with me, gripping it so tightly my knuckles ached. The fire in the stove cast flickering shadows on the walls. I stayed still, barely breathing. Then silence. I sat there, knife in hand, until the first light of dawn filtered through the window. Only then did I dare move. I crept to the door, listening. Nothing. I slowly unwedged the chair, knife at the ready, and opened the door just a crack. Footprints, huge ones pressed deep into the dirt. Not boot prints, bare feet. I slammed the door shut. I didn't go outside that day. I stayed in the cabin, listening. Every sound made my skin crawl. Branches snapping, leaves rustling. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the fire with the knife in my lap, waiting. At some point, exhaustion won. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, something was inside the cabin. A breath, slow, deep, inches from my face. I woke up gasping, the knife swinging wildly in my hand. But there was nothing there. The door was still locked, the chair still wedged beneath it. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows across the room. I couldn't stay another night. At first light, I grabbed my bags and bolted to the SUV. The whole time I felt it, watching, standing just beyond the trees, waiting. The moment the engine roared to life, I slammed it into reverse, tires spinning in the dirt. I didn't look back. I drove straight through the night, only stopping when I reached the city. When I finally parked outside my apartment, I sat there for a long time, gripping the wheel. My heart was still pounding. My hands were shaking. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was alone in that cabin, that I had just let my mind play tricks on me. But sometimes, in the middle of the night, I wake up to the sound of breathing, and I know I didn't imagine it. I always loved hiking alone. There was something about being deep in the woods, away from everything, that made me feel alive. The silence, the isolation, it was peaceful, or at least it used to be. I had planned this trip for weeks, a solo 3-day hike through a remote trail in the mountains. I had my backpack loaded with everything I needed. A tent, a sleeping bag, enough food and water, and a good knife, just in case. The forecast was clear, and I had mapped out my route carefully. I felt confident. The first day was perfect. The air was crisp, the trees were tall and endless, and the only sounds were birds and the crunch of my boots on the dirt path. I made good progress, stopping occasionally to take in the view. By late afternoon, I reached a clearing near a small stream and decided to set up camp. I built a fire, cooked some food, and sat in the fading light, listening to the quiet. It felt like I was the only person in the world. That night, I woke up suddenly. I didn't know why. My fire had burned down to embers, and the forest was pitch black. I listened. Nothing, just the wind through the trees. But something felt off. I wasn't sure what. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me, rolled over, and forced myself back to sleep. The next morning, I packed up and continued on. The trail got steeper, winding through thick forest. It was harder going, but I liked the challenge. Around midday, I noticed something strange. A tree ahead of me had deep scratches in its bark. 3 long, parallel marks like something had clawed at it. I stopped, examining them. They were fresh. The wood underneath was pale and raw. I tried to shake off the unease creeping into my stomach. Probably a bear, I told myself. Nothing to worry about. A few hours later, I found another tree with the same marks. Then another. Each time, the scratches looked fresh, as if they had just been made. My instincts told me to turn back, but I was stubborn. I told myself I was imagining things. There were bears in these woods, sure, but they usually avoided people. I pressed on. By late afternoon, the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I kept stopping, turning around, scanning the trees. Nothing. No movement. No sound. But I couldn't shake it. The woods, once so peaceful, felt different now, like they were holding their breath. I made camp earlier than planned, setting up in a small, rocky clearing. I didn't bother with a fire. I ate quickly, zipped myself into my sleeping bag, and tried to ignore the dread curling in my stomach. Sleep didn't come easy. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the underbrush made my heart pound. I gripped my knife under the covers, telling myself I was being paranoid. At some point, I drifted off. Then I woke up. Something was outside my tent. I didn't move. I barely breathed. My skin prickled, every nerve in my body screaming. I listened. A slow, deliberate step. Then another. Not an animal. Too heavy. I lay frozen, gripping my knife so tight my hand ached. The footsteps stopped, just outside the thin fabric of my tent. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then, a long, slow exhale. Right next to me, I shot up, yanking my knife free, and slashed blindly at the tent wall. Something moved fast. I heard it crash through the trees, heavy footfalls fading into the darkness. I sat there, shaking, gasping for air. I waited until dawn before I dared to move. When the first light broke through the trees, I unzipped the tent slowly and stepped out. The ground around my camp was disturbed. Deep, heavy footprints circled my tent. They were human. I packed up as fast as I could. I abandoned my planned route and took the fastest way back to the trailhead. My whole body was on edge. Every noise made me jump. I kept looking over my shoulder. The feeling of being watched never left. By late afternoon, I reached a point where I should have been close to the end of the trail. But something was wrong. The path ahead didn't look familiar. The trees were wrong. The rocks were wrong. I checked my map, my compass. They told me I was going the right way, but everything in my gut screamed otherwise. I kept walking, hoping it was just my nerves. But an hour later, I was still in the same forest. I should have been at the parking lot by now. My stomach twisted. I was lost. I forced myself to stay calm. I followed the compass, even though my instincts told me I was going in circles. The sun started to set. I had no choice but to make camp again. That night was worse than the last. I didn't sleep. I didn't even try. I sat with my knife in my hand, listening, waiting. At some point in the night, I heard it again. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. I held my breath. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. The footsteps stopped right at the edge of my camp. Then something whistled. A slow, tuneless whistle. My stomach turned to ice. I wanted to run, but I knew better. Running made you pray. I gripped my knife and waited. The whistle stopped. The forest went silent again. Hours passed. Then the first light of dawn crept in. I didn't wait. I packed up and moved as fast as I could. I didn't care about the trail anymore. I just wanted out. Then I saw something ahead. A shape standing between the trees. Tall, motionless, watching me. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I didn't look back. I just ran. I don't remember how I found the trailhead. One moment, I was lost in the trees, and the next, I was stumbling into the parking lot. My car was there, right where I left it. I practically threw myself inside, locked the doors, and sped off. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't want to see if something was standing there. I never went back to those woods. I never hiked alone again. And sometimes, in the middle of the night when everything is quiet, I swear I hear it. That slow, tuneless whistle. I don't know what made me choose that trail. Maybe it was the challenge. Maybe it was the idea of escaping everything for a while. I had been hiking for years, but I had never attempted this particular route before. It wasn't a popular one, and from what I had read online, not many people hiked it anymore. The trail led deep into the mountains, miles away from any roads or campsites. It was supposed to be difficult, but that was exactly what I wanted. I started early in the morning, just as the sun was rising. The air was crisp, and the forest smelled damp from the previous night's rain. The first few miles were easy. The path was well-defined, cutting through thick trees and occasionally opening up to reveal breathtaking views of the valley below. I felt good, strong, confident. I had packed everything I needed: food, water, a tent, a map, a compass, a knife, and a small emergency kit. I wasn't worried. As the morning turned into afternoon, the trail became rougher. It wasn't marked as well as I had hoped, and I found myself stopping more often to check my map. The forest felt denser. The trees were taller, their branches thick, blocking out most of the sunlight. There was no wind, no birds chirping, just the sound of my own footsteps and the occasional rustling in the underbrush. I told myself it was just small animals. Squirrels, maybe, a rabbit. Nothing unusual. By late afternoon, I had covered a lot of ground, but I was starting to feel uneasy. The trail had narrowed, and the ground beneath me was getting steeper. It wasn't supposed to be this difficult. I checked my map again. I should have reached a clearing by now, a spot where other hikers had supposedly camped before. But there was nothing, just more trees, more uneven ground, and an eerie silence that made me feel like I wasn't alone. Then I saw the footprints. They weren't mine. They were older, slightly faded, but still visible in the damp earth. They were human, but something about them felt off. The spacing was inconsistent, like whoever made them had been walking strangely. I stared at them for a long time, then forced myself to keep moving. Maybe another hiker had come this way recently. Maybe they had just been tired and dragging their feet. I told myself it was nothing, but then I saw something else. A piece of fabric caught on a low-hanging branch. It was dark red, almost brown, torn and frayed at the edges. It looked old. I hesitated before reaching out to touch it. It felt stiff, like it had been there for a long time. I dropped it and stepped back. My mind started racing. Had someone gotten lost here? Had something happened? I scanned the trees, half expecting to see someone watching me. But there was nothing, just silence. The sun was starting to set, and I knew I needed to set up camp soon. I forced myself to keep walking, my heart pounding harder with each step. The forest felt different now, heavier. The air was thick, and every sound seemed amplified. I finally found a small clearing and decided it would have to do. I set up my tent quickly, my hands unsteady as I secured the stakes. I didn't feel hungry, but I forced myself to eat. I needed the energy. As darkness settled, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I kept my knife close and tried to sleep, but every sound made my eyes snap open. Twigs breaking, leaves rustling. The sounds were too close, too deliberate. I wanted to believe it was just an animal, but I knew better. I stayed awake, my body tense, listening. Hours passed. Then, sometime in the middle of the night, I heard it. Breathing. Slow. Deep. Not mine. It was just outside my tent. I held my breath, gripping my knife so tightly my hand ached. My mind raced through my options. If I unzipped the tent, I'd expose myself. If I stayed inside, I was trapped. The breathing continued, steady and unhurried. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. Silence. I waited, my entire body frozen. Minutes passed, then an hour. I didn't dare move. Eventually, exhaustion won. I must have drifted off because the next thing I knew, the sun was rising. I didn't waste any time packing up. My body ached from tension and lack of sleep, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get out. The trail was even harder to follow in the morning light. It felt different, like it had changed overnight. I kept glancing over my shoulder, convinced someone, or something, was behind me, but I saw nothing. Then I came across something I hadn't seen before. Another tent. It was old, covered in dirt and partially collapsed. The fabric was torn, the poles snapped. It had been there for a long time. I forced myself to look inside. A sleeping bag, shredded. A backpack, empty. No signs of a person, just abandoned, left to rot. My stomach twisted. Someone had camped here. Someone had left in a hurry. Or worse, they hadn't left at all. I moved faster. I didn't stop for water, didn't check my map. I just ran. The forest blurred around me, branches whipping against my arms. I stumbled, fell, got back up. I didn't care about injuries. I just needed to get out. The fear was primal now, raw and overpowering. Something was wrong with this place. Something was watching me. I could feel it. It took hours, but I finally made it back to where the trail started. My car was still there, untouched. I threw my pack in the back and sped off, not stopping until I was miles away. Only then did I allow myself to breathe. I don't know what happened in that forest. I don't know who left that tent or whose footprints I saw. I don't know what was outside my tent that night, but I do know one thing. I will never go back. I've been hiking for years, but this was the first time I truly felt like I was being hunted. Not by a bear or a mountain lion, but by something far worse, something that wore a human face. It started as just another solo hike. I had taken time off work and wanted to clear my head. My plan was to spend 3 days deep in the mountains, away from the noise of the city. I packed light but made sure I had all the essentials. Plenty of water, food, a first aid kit, my tent, and a knife. I'd been in these mountains before, but never this deep. The route I had picked was a little more remote, less traveled, exactly what I was looking for. The first day was uneventful. I walked for miles, taking in the crisp mountain air and the sound of the wind moving through the trees. By late afternoon, I had set up camp near a small creek. I made a fire, cooked a simple meal, and watched the sky darken. The night was peaceful, the stars stretching endlessly above me. I remember feeling lucky, grateful even, to be out here, alone with nature. If I had known what was coming, I would have turned back then. The second day was when things started feeling off. I woke up early, packed my gear, and continued deeper into the forest. The trail was narrower here, the trees more crowded together. There was a strange stillness in the air, a quiet that felt unnatural. No birds, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush, just silence. By midday, I reached a clearing and decided to rest. I sat on a fallen tree, drinking water, eating a granola bar. That's when I noticed it, a footprint in the dirt. Not mine, fresh. It wasn't unusual to see other hikers' footprints, but something about this one made me pause. It was deep, like the person was heavier than me, and the tread pattern was odd. Not a hiking boot, something smoother, almost like a dress shoe. I tried to shake it off. Maybe a ranger had come through or some other hiker with bad footwear choices. But I felt uneasy. I picked up my pace after that, moving quicker, pushing myself further. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone. No one was there. By the time I made camp that night, my nerves were shot. I set up my tent near a rocky outcrop, using the boulders as a windbreak. My fire was smaller than usual, the light barely stretching past my tent. I ate quickly, my ears straining for any sound beyond the crackling flames. Then I heard it, a branch snapping. Close. I froze, my spoon halfway to my mouth. My brain scrambled for explanations. An animal? A falling branch? Wind? But there was no wind, and the sound had been deliberate, slow, cautious. I put my food down and reached for my knife. My heart hammered in my chest. I stared into the darkness, straining my eyes, but I couldn't see anything. I listened. Nothing, just the fire crackling. After what felt like an eternity, I forced myself to relax. I was being paranoid. Long hikes could do that to you, make you see things, hear things. The mind plays tricks. Still, I kept my knife close as I crawled into my tent. I barely slept. Every tiny sound made my eyes snap open. The wind against the fabric, the settling of the trees, the occasional creak from the woods. I thought I heard footsteps once, slow, deliberate steps near my campsite, but when I forced myself to look, nothing was there. By the time the sun came up, I was exhausted. My plan had been to push deeper into the mountains, but I changed my mind. I decided to loop back instead, take a different route, but head toward the trailhead. I wasn't scared exactly, but I felt uneasy, like I had overstayed my welcome. I moved fast, almost too fast, ignoring my body's exhaustion. I just wanted to get out of there. But as I hiked, I started noticing things. A cigarette butt on the side of the trail, still fresh. A scrap of cloth snagged on a tree branch, too clean to have been there long. And then, the worst thing, another footprint. The same as before. Deep, smooth-soled. But this time, there were two. Side by side, facing the trail. Like someone had stood there, watching. I nearly ran after that. My body screamed in protest, but I pushed on, my only goal being to reach the main trail before dark. I was miles from my car, but if I could just get back to a more populated area, I'd feel better, safer. I don't know how long I walked before I saw the cabin. It wasn't on any map. It wasn't an old ranger station or an abandoned shack. It looked lived in. The windows were boarded up, but the door was slightly ajar. And the worst part? The footprints led straight to it. Something told me to keep walking, not to stop, but my curiosity got the better of me. I crept closer, just enough to see inside. The smell hit me first. Rotting meat, the stench of something long dead. My stomach turned, my skin crawling. I didn't want to look, but I did. Inside, the walls were covered in something dark. Smears, streaks. The furniture was old, broken. There were empty cans of food, a filthy mattress in the corner. And on the far wall, scratched into the wood, were words. Don't turn around. Every hair on my body stood up. I felt my breath catch, my stomach drop. I didn't want to, but I couldn't help myself. I turned. Nothing. Just trees. Silent, unmoving trees. I ran. I don't remember making the choice. My body just did it. I tore through the woods, my pack slamming against my back, my lungs burning. I didn't stop. Not even when I tripped. Not even when branches tore at my arms and face. I ran until I saw the trailhead, until I saw my car. I fumbled with my keys, threw my gear into the back, and peeled out of there so fast my tires kicked up gravel. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away, until I saw buildings, people, signs of normal life. I never went back to that trail. I never reported the cabin. I don't know why. Maybe I was scared of what they'd find. Or worse, what they wouldn't. All I know is that something or someone was out there, watching, waiting, and I was never supposed to leave. I had always loved hiking alone. There was something about the solitude, the rhythmic crunch of my boots against the dirt, and the overwhelming silence of nature that put my mind at ease. It was the only time I felt truly disconnected from the noise of life. So when I planned a 3-day solo hike through the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest, I was excited. I had done hikes like this before, nothing too extreme, just long, quiet treks through deep woods and over rolling hills. The first day went by smoothly. The trail was well marked, the air crisp with the scent of damp earth and pine needles. I followed a winding path that led through towering trees, their branches tangled high above, blocking most of the sunlight. Occasionally, I'd hear the distant call of a bird or the rustling of leaves as a small animal darted away. But for the most part, it was just me and the forest. I made good time and reached my planned campsite near a small creek before sunset. I set up my tent, made a small fire, and boiled water for my dehydrated meal. As I sat there, listening to the gentle trickle of water and the occasional snap of a twig somewhere in the distance, I felt completely at peace. There was no one around for miles, just me, the trees, and the darkening sky. The first night was uneventful. I woke up once, around 3 a.m., to a distant rustling outside my tent, but I assumed it was just a raccoon or some other nocturnal animal. After a few minutes of listening, I drifted back to sleep. The second day, I planned to cover more ground. The path ahead led deeper into the forest, away from any established campsites. I was heading toward an old, lesser-known trail that I had read about online. It wasn't marked on most maps, but experienced hikers sometimes mentioned it in forums. It was supposed to be beautiful, cutting through an area of untouched wilderness. As I moved forward, the trail became narrower, the trees pressing in closer. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. No birds, no wind through the leaves, just silence. It felt unnatural. I kept telling myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I pushed forward, telling myself that once I reached the ridge, I'd feel better. By midday, I found a clearing where I stopped to eat. The air was heavy and still. I checked my phone, no signal, which I expected. The sun was high above, but the light felt weaker here, like the trees were swallowing it before it could touch the ground. As I packed up and started walking again, I noticed something strange. The trail ahead looked different than I remembered from my research. It should have curved gently to the right, but instead, it went straight into a dense thicket. I paused, confused. Had I made a wrong turn? I pulled out my map and compass. According to them, I was still on track. I decided to keep going. Maybe the trail had changed over time, or maybe I had just remembered it wrong. But as I walked, the feeling of unease grew. The path felt wrong. The trees here were different, thicker, older, their trunks covered in deep scars. I kept walking, my breathing growing shallow. Then I saw it. A shoe. Just one, lying half buried in the dirt. It was old, the fabric faded, the rubber sole cracked. It looked like it had been there for years. My first thought was that someone had lost it, maybe a careless hiker. But as I took another step, I saw something else. A torn backpack strap, dangling from a low branch. I felt my stomach tighten. I wasn't the first person to come this way. I tried to shake it off. People lose things on trails all the time. I kept moving, but I couldn't ignore the way my body was reacting. My hands were sweaty despite the cool air, and my legs felt stiff. I needed to get out of here. I pushed forward faster than before. The trail wound deeper, twisting in ways that didn't make sense. I felt like I was being led somewhere, not following a natural path, but something designed to pull me in. The trees seemed closer together now, their trunks forming dark corridors. Then I saw another sign, a rusted, broken pocket knife lying in the dirt. That was enough. I turned around, determined to retrace my steps and get back to familiar ground. But as I walked, the trail didn't look the same. The trees seemed different, the landscape unfamiliar. I told myself to stay calm, to follow my compass and map. But no matter which way I went, I couldn't find the clearing where I had stopped for lunch. It was like the forest had shifted around me. Panic started creeping in. I forced myself to breathe slowly, to think logically. I had enough supplies to last a few days. Worst case, I could camp and try again in the morning. I found a small, relatively open area and set up my tent. That night, the forest wasn't silent. I heard movement, not the random rustling of animals, but deliberate steps. Slow, steady, circling my tent. I lay there, gripping my knife, barely breathing. The steps would stop, then start again, closer this time. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. The hours dragged on, and I forced myself to stay awake, listening. Just before dawn, the steps stopped. As soon as the sky started to lighten, I packed up and moved. My body was screaming at me to run, but I forced myself to stay steady. I followed my compass, ignoring the twisting trails, pushing straight in one direction. Hours passed. My legs burned. My throat was dry, but I kept moving. Then finally I saw it. A familiar tree, one I had passed the day before. Relief flooded through me. I was back on the main trail. I didn't stop. I hiked faster than I ever had, pushing forward until, at last, I saw the parking lot in the distance. I didn't look back. I never went hiking alone again. I always enjoyed hiking alone. The quiet, the solitude, the way the forest swallowed up the sound of the outside world. It was peaceful. That's why I decided to take a weekend trip into the mountains, following an old trail I had read about online. It was supposed to be remote, untouched, perfect for what I wanted, just me and nature. The first few miles were exactly what I expected. The path wound through thick trees, the air smelled of pine and damp earth, and birds called out from somewhere deep in the woods. The trail was narrow but well-marked, cutting through stretches of dense forest before opening up into clearings where the sun beamed down in warm patches. Everything felt right. I hiked for hours before stopping for a break. I found a good spot off the trail, a small clearing surrounded by tall trees. I set my pack down, took a sip of water, and let my legs rest. The only sound was the rustling of leaves in the breeze. That's when I noticed it. Something was off. It wasn't anything obvious, but a feeling crept up my spine. The air felt different, heavier. The forest around me seemed too still. I couldn't place it, but suddenly I felt uneasy, like I was being watched. I scanned the trees, looking for movement. Nothing, just shadows shifting as the wind stirred the branches. I shook it off, convincing myself it was just my mind playing tricks. I had been alone for hours, after all. I should have turned back then, but I didn't. I got up, slung my pack over my shoulders, and kept moving. The trail began to change subtly at first. The dirt path became rockier, the trees pressed in closer. The markers were still there, faded paint on trees and small wooden signs, but something about them seemed wrong. I couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the way they were weathered, older than they should have been. Maybe it was the way they seemed misplaced, like someone had shifted them slightly, leading me somewhere different than where the trail was meant to go. An hour passed, then another. I checked my map. According to it, I should have been nearing a small stream where I could refill my water. But there was no stream, just more trees, more rocks, more silence. I should have been worried then, but I wasn't. Not yet. I kept moving forward, following the markers, trusting the trail even though something about it felt wrong. The unease never fully left me, but I pushed it down. It was just my imagination. Then I found the cabin. It wasn't on the map. It wasn't supposed to be here, but there it was, tucked between the trees like it had grown out of the earth itself. The wood was dark, weathered, almost black. The roof sagged in places. The windows were empty, just gaping holes staring out at the forest. No glass, no curtains, just empty spaces. I stopped. Every instinct told me to turn around, to walk away. But curiosity got the better of me. I took a step closer. The ground beneath my foot shifted. A soft crunch. I looked down. Bones. Small ones. Scattered. Brittle. Sun-bleached. Animal, I told myself. Just an animal. The cabin door was slightly open. Just enough that I could see inside. Darkness. I don't know how long I stood there, staring. Something about that open door made my stomach twist. Felt wrong. Like a trap. Like something was waiting just beyond the threshold, hidden in the dark, watching. I turned away. I don't know why, but I felt like if I stepped inside, I wouldn't come back out. I kept walking. The trail was worse now, barely there. The trees loomed taller, the air heavier. I felt lightheaded, like the oxygen had thinned. My stomach churned. I was exhausted, but I didn't want to stop. I wanted out. I needed to find my way back. That's when I heard it. Not an animal, not the wind, a sound that didn't belong. Footsteps, not mine. Slow, careful, somewhere behind me. I stopped. So did they. The forest was too thick to see far. Shadows stretched long across the ground. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the trees. Nothing. I moved forward. A few steps, then stopped. The footsteps followed. My body went cold. I wasn't alone. I walked faster. So did they. I didn't run. I wanted to, but I knew better. Running would make noise. Noise would give me away. I forced myself to keep a steady pace, pretending I hadn't noticed. My heart pounded. My breathing was too loud. I focused on the path, on putting one foot in front of the other. Then the footsteps stopped. Just stopped. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see what was there. I just kept moving faster now. The trees began to thin. The air lightened. I recognized the landscape. I was getting close to the trailhead. Then I smelled it. Rot. Like something long dead. something left to decay under the sun. But the air was cool, the sun hidden behind the trees. The smell shouldn't have been here. It grew stronger with every step. Then I saw them, tents, old, weathered, sagging under their own weight. 4 of them scattered in a clearing just off the path. I stopped. I didn't want to, but my body wouldn't move. The campsite was abandoned, long abandoned. The tents were torn, the fabric brittle. I stepped closer. A backpack lay beside one of the tents, half buried in the dirt. I nudged it with my foot. Fell open. Clothes, a wallet, a phone, screen cracked, dead. Then I saw the note. A scrap of paper, torn from a notebook, caught in the entrance of the nearest tent. One word, scrawled in shaky handwriting. Run. I did. I didn't stop. Didn't look back. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs felt like they would give out. The trail widened. The trees parted. And then, my car. I stumbled toward it, hands shaking as I fumbled for my keys. I threw myself inside, locked the doors, started the engine. I didn't breathe until I was miles away. I don't know who or what was out there. I don't want to know. I just know I won't be hiking alone again. Ever. I had planned the hike for weeks. It was supposed to be a solo trip. Just me, the trees, and the endless sky stretching over the mountains. I had done this kind of thing before. Packing light but smart, mapping out the route in advance, and keeping my gear in top shape. I wasn't a beginner. I knew what I was doing. The trail I chose was deep in the wilderness, far from any tourist-heavy spots. It wasn't some well-paved path with signs and maps at every corner. It was raw, untouched, the kind of place where you wouldn't see another human for days if you went deep enough. That was the whole point. I wanted that silence, that disconnection from everything. I set out early in the morning, just as the sun was starting to break over the horizon. The air was crisp, clean. The smell of damp earth and pine needles filled my lungs as I stepped onto the trail. The first few hours were perfect. My boots crunched over gravel and leaves, my breathing steady. Every step took me further away from civilization, and that was exactly what I wanted. By noon, I had covered a good distance. I took a break by a small creek, refilled my water bottle with my filter, and ate a quick meal. The sound of running water was soothing, and for a moment, I let my guard down. I leaned back against a rock, closed my eyes, and just listened. Then I heard something else, a crunch, like a footstep on dry leaves. I sat up immediately, scanning the trees. Nothing. No movement, no sign of anything out of the ordinary. Probably an animal, I told myself. This deep in the woods, it was normal to hear things. I shook off the unease and continued. The trail got steeper as I climbed, the terrain more rugged. Rocks jutted out at awkward angles. Tree roots snaked across the ground like veins. I moved carefully, focusing on my footing. But that feeling, like I wasn't alone, stuck with me. Hours passed. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows through the trees. I needed to set up camp before it got too dark. I found a relatively flat clearing near a cliffside, giving me a good view of the valley below. It was beautiful, but something about it felt off. I ignored it. I was just tired, I told myself. I set up my tent, built a small fire, and ate my dinner. The sky turned from orange to deep purple, then black. The stars looked sharper out here, the air colder. That's when I heard it again. A footstep, closer this time. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. I grabbed my flashlight and aimed it toward the trees. The beam cut through the darkness, landing on nothing but trunks and branches. I stayed still for a long time, listening. The fire crackled beside me. The wind rustled the leaves, but there was nothing else. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. Being alone out here, surrounded by darkness, could do that to you. I forced myself to relax, climbed into my tent, and zipped it up. My knife was within reach, just in case. Sleep didn't come easily. Every little sound made me open my eyes. The wind, the distant hoot of an owl, the shifting of the trees. And then something different, something moving just outside my tent. I held my breath, My fingers curled around the handle of my knife. The sound was slow, deliberate, not the skittering of a small animal. Something larger. I waited and waited, then silence. Minutes passed, maybe longer. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I drifted into a light, uneasy sleep. Morning came, and I unzipped my tent cautiously. The first thing I noticed was the ground. The dirt around my camp was disturbed, like someone had been walking in circles. But there were no clear footprints, just impressions. I packed up quickly. My gut told me to leave, but I was deep in the trail. It would take at least a full day to get back. I had no choice but to keep moving. The unease never left me. Every few minutes, I stopped to listen. The forest felt different now, less welcoming. By midday, I reached a narrow pass between two cliffs. The path was tight, just a few feet across, with sheer drops on either side. I moved carefully, hugging the rock face. Then I heard it. A sound behind me, a scrape, like a boot against stone. I whipped around, but there was nothing, just empty space and the trees below. My pulse pounded in my ears. I turned back and kept moving, faster now. My body was tense, every nerve on edge. I felt watched. And then the smell. It was faint at first, a hint of something foul, something rotten. It got stronger as I moved forward, until it was unbearable, like death baking under the sun. I reached a bend in the trail, and that's when I saw it. A backpack, torn open, the contents scattered. A few feet away, something worse. Shreds of clothing, a boot with the laces still tied, dried stains on the rocks. My stomach dropped. I wasn't the only one who had come this way, and whoever had been here before me hadn't made it out. I didn't think. I just ran. I didn't care about the trail anymore. I moved as fast as I could, crashing through branches, stumbling over rocks. I didn't stop until I saw the first signs of civilization. A sliver of a road through the trees. When I finally reached my car, I locked the doors, my hands shaking as I turned the key in the ignition. I never went back. Later, I searched for missing person reports in the area. There were several. Names, faces, people who had gone hiking and never returned. I don't know what I heard that night. I don't know what left those marks around my tent or who or what was watching me. But I do know one thing. Something is out there, and it doesn't want to be found. I had been planning this hike for weeks. It was a remote trail, deep in the backcountry with no official name, just a route pieced together from old maps and scattered forum posts. The appeal was the isolation. No tourists, no families with kids, no weekend hikers with Bluetooth speakers blasting music. Just raw nature. The drive out there was long, mostly dirt roads with no signs, but I finally reached the trailhead around noon. The sky was clear, and the air smelled like pine and damp earth. I strapped on my pack, checked my water, and started walking. The first few miles were beautiful. Thick forest, the sound of birds, a crisp breeze. I took my time, enjoying the quiet. There was no defined path, just a faint, overgrown track that wound through the trees. I had my GPS, but I also carried a paper map and compass just in case. About 3 hours in, I reached a ridge. The view was incredible. Rolling green hills, a distant river, and no sign of civilization in any direction. I stopped for a quick snack and then pressed on, heading down the other side into denser woods. That's when I noticed something odd. The forest felt different. The air was heavier, the silence deeper. I hadn't seen an animal in a while, not even a bird, just trees and thick underbrush, closing in on both sides. Then I saw it, a boot, half buried in the dirt, scuffed, old, just sitting there, like someone had stepped out of it and walked away. I nudged it with my foot, empty, but nearby there was another one. Not a pair, this one was different, a different brand, smaller. Something about it made my skin crawl. People lose gear all the time, but this? 2 random boots, different sizes, miles from any trail? I moved on. No reason to dwell on it. But as I walked, I started noticing more. A torn piece of fabric caught on a bush, a rusted canteen, an old, sun-bleached backpack, its straps shredded. It was unsettling, but I told myself there had to be a reason. Maybe an old campsite, maybe hunters, maybe just junk that had been there for years. I kept going. The deeper I got, the stranger it felt. The trees grew denser, the ground uneven. My GPS showed I was still on track, but the landscape didn't match the map. And then I found the clearing. It was small, no more than 20 feet across. The ground was unnaturally flat, the grass shorter than it should have been. And in the center, a pile of bones. Not human, at least I hoped not, but picked clean, brittle with age. Scattered, as if something had torn whatever animal this was apart. I felt exposed, like I was being watched. I turned around and started back. That's when I realized something was wrong. The trees looked different. The path I had just walked didn't look familiar anymore. The terrain was off slightly, but enough that I noticed. My gut tightened. I pulled out my GPS, but the screen glitched, flickered. Then it froze completely. No service, of course. I took a deep breath and checked my map. According to it, I should have been able to backtrack easily, but nothing around me matched. I picked a direction and walked, trying to stay calm. An hour passed, then two. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows through the trees. I hadn't found the ridge, the stream, or anything I recognized. Then I saw movement. Not an animal, something human. Just a flicker between the trees, too fast to make out. I stopped, listened. Nothing. I moved faster. My breathing was heavy, my muscles tight. Every so often, I'd see it again. Something, someone, always just out of sight. I told myself it was my mind playing tricks, that I was just spooked. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Then I smelled it. Rot, wet, decaying, thick and heavy, coating the back of my throat. I stumbled forward, desperate now, pushing through the undergrowth. My foot caught on something, and I fell hard, scraping my hands on the dirt. I looked down. A body, not fresh, not old. The clothes were faded, the skin leathery, but the smell, God, the smell. The face was gone. Just an empty, hollowed-out skull staring up at me. I scrambled back, heart hammering. And then I heard it. Not footsteps, not breathing, just movement. Close, too close. I ran. Branches slapped my face. Roots caught my ankles, but I didn't stop. Couldn't. I ran until my legs burned, until my lungs felt like they were going to burst. Then suddenly the trees thinned. I stumbled onto a dirt road, collapsing onto my knees. A road, a real, actual road. I forced myself up and followed it, shaking, exhausted. I walked for what felt like hours until I saw the glint of a car. My car. I didn't question it. I just got in, locked the doors, and drove. I don't know how I got turned around. I don't know who or what I saw, but I do know one thing. I will never go back. I planned the trip for months. A solo hike through the Cascade Mountains, deep into the wilderness where the trees stretched forever, and the trails were barely visible. I wanted something real, something that would push me to my limits. No cell service, no distractions, just me and the forest. The first few days were perfect. The air was crisp, and the scent of pine was strong in the cool breeze. My boots crunched against the dirt path, and the only sounds were birds chirping and the occasional rustle of leaves as small animals darted through the underbrush. I kept a steady pace, following my map, making sure to mark my progress on my GPS before I lost service completely. By the fourth day, I was deep in the backcountry, far from any designated camping spots. That night, I set up my tent in a small clearing, ate a quick meal, and fell asleep fast. It was the middle of the night when I woke up suddenly. I wasn't sure why at first. The forest was silent, too silent. The normal hum of crickets and rustling leaves was gone. I listened, straining my ears, but there was nothing, just a deep, heavy silence that felt wrong. I told myself it was just my imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I grabbed my flashlight, unzipped the tent quietly, and shined it around the trees. Nothing moved. No glowing eyes reflecting back at me, just towering trunks and darkness. I sat awake for a while, waiting for the normal sounds of the forest to return, but they never did. Eventually, exhaustion won, and I drifted back to sleep. The next morning, everything seemed normal again. Birds were chirping, and the wind was rustling through the trees. I brushed off the night's weirdness and continued my hike. The trail was getting harder to follow, but I had my compass and map, so I wasn't worried. By midday, I reached a ridge with a view stretching for miles. The landscape was beautiful, untouched wilderness in every direction. I took a break, drank some water, and checked my map. That's when I noticed something strange. The trail I had been following wasn't on the map anymore. I traced my route back, checking my notes and landmarks, but something didn't add up. The ridge should have been further west. The river I passed in the morning wasn't where it was supposed to be. It didn't make sense. I had been careful, following my bearings, marking my progress, but somehow I was off course. A knot formed in my stomach. I wasn't lost, not yet, but something wasn't right. I decided to backtrack, retrace my steps, and find where I went wrong. But as I hiked, the terrain looked different. The trees, the slopes, even the way the light filtered through the branches, it all felt wrong. I checked my compass, but the needle was spinning slightly, not holding steady like it should. I kept moving, trying to stay calm, but an hour passed, then two, and nothing looked familiar. My pace picked up. My breathing grew heavy. The sky was starting to dim, and I knew I had to find a place to set up camp before dark. I picked a small clearing between two thick pines, trying to shake the unease creeping up my spine. That night, I barely slept. The silence was back. No wind, no insects, just the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. Then, around midnight, I heard it. Footsteps. Not an animal. Not the scampering of small critters. These were slow, deliberate steps. They crunched the forest floor in an even rhythm, getting closer. I held my breath, gripping my knife, and waited. The steps stopped just outside my tent. I could hear breathing low, steady. I wanted to turn on my flashlight, but my gut told me not to. I stayed completely still, listening, waiting. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the footsteps moved away, fading into the trees until they were gone. I didn't sleep at all after that. The first light, I packed up and started moving. I had no clear plan except to keep going and find my way back to something familiar. But every direction I took led me deeper into unfamiliar terrain. My water supply was running low, and I was rationing food carefully. The thought of another night out here made my stomach twist. That evening, I found an old, overgrown trail. Relief flooded through me. Trails meant people, eventually. I followed it, moving fast, hoping it would lead somewhere safe. But as I walked, I started noticing something that made my blood run cold. The trees had deep scratches on them. Not from animals. These were long, jagged marks, as if something had been dragged across the bark with force. The further I went, the more I saw. Some trees had strips of their bark completely torn away, exposing the pale wood underneath. My hands were shaking, but I kept moving. Then I saw the campsite, or what was left of it. A single tent, collapsed and torn, like something had clawed through it. Gear was scattered around, ripped backpacks, shredded sleeping bags. The fire pit was filled with ashes, long cold. But the worst part was the smell. A sickly, rotting scent that made my stomach churn. And then I saw the bones. Pile of them picked clean. Too big to be from an animal. My body went cold. My breath came in short gasps. I turned and ran. I didn't care where I was going anymore. I just needed to get away. I ran until my legs burned, until my lungs screamed for air. The sun was setting again, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't spend another night out here. Then, through the trees, I saw something, a structure, a fire lookout tower. I sprinted towards it, my last bit of energy pushing me forward. The metal stairs creaked under my weight as I climbed, my hands shaking as I reached the door at the top. It was locked. I banged on it, shouting for help, but there was no answer. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. I turned, scanning the forest below. The trees stretched endlessly in every direction. And that's when I saw it. A A figure standing at the edge of the tree line, too far to make out details, but close enough that I knew it was watching me. Just standing there, waiting. I stayed up there the whole night, gripping my knife, barely blinking. The figure never moved, just stood there, waiting. By morning, it was gone, and I ran. Down the stairs, through the trees, moving as fast as my exhausted body would let me. I don't remember how long I ran, hours maybe, but eventually, I stumbled onto a real trail, a marked one, and later that day I found a road. A group of hikers picked me up. I didn't tell them everything, just that I got lost, that I'd been out there longer than planned. They gave me food, water, a ride back to town. I never reported what I found. I don't think I ever will. I don't know what was out there. I don't want to know, but I do know one thing for sure. I'll never hike alone again. I had planned this hike for months, a solo trek through the backwoods of Oregon, deep in a stretch of forest rarely touched by human activity. It wasn't some tourist-friendly national park with well-marked trails and guideposts every few miles. This was raw, wild land, the kind that made you feel truly alone. That was the whole point. Just me, my gear, and nature. I started early in the morning, the sun barely rising as I parked my truck at a small pull-off beside a forgotten dirt road. There was no official trailhead, just an old logging road that disappeared into the trees. I shouldered my pack, double-checked my supplies, and stepped into the unknown. The first few miles were peaceful. The forest was alive with birdsong, the crisp morning air filling my lungs. The ground was soft underfoot, damp from the previous night's rain. Everything smelled fresh, earthy, clean. I followed an old game trail, barely a footpath, winding through dense pines and thick underbrush. Occasionally, I saw signs of wildlife. A few deer tracks in the mud, a squirrel chattering angrily from a branch above. But otherwise, I was alone, exactly how I wanted it. By midday, I had covered about 7 miles. I found a decent clearing and sat down for a quick lunch. A protein bar, some jerky, a swig of water. My plan was simple. Hike another 5 or 6 miles, set up camp, and then head back in the morning. I didn't have a strict route, just a general direction. I had my compass, my map, and a good sense of where I was. Everything was going according to plan. That changed in the afternoon. I was about 10 miles in when I noticed something strange. The forest had gone quiet. The birds had stopped singing. The insects had stopped buzzing. Even the wind, which had been rustling through the trees all morning, had died down. It was an eerie silence, the kind that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination. But as I walked, I started noticing other things. The trail, if you could even call it that, had become harder to follow. The trees looked different, twisted almost, their bark gnarled and peeling. The undergrowth was thicker, harder to push through. And then there were the tracks. At first, I thought they were animal prints, but the more I looked, the less sense they made. They were large, but not like a bear or a cougar. The shape was odd, elongated, almost human, but wrong. They were spaced strangely, like whatever made them had an unnatural gait. I crouched down, running my fingers through the dirt, fresh, maybe a few hours old. I stood up quickly, suddenly uneasy. The logical part of my brain told me it was just a misinterpretation, a trick of the light. But my gut was telling me something else. Something wasn't right. I pressed on, but my pace was slower now, more cautious. I kept scanning the trees, listening, waiting for some sound. Any sound. Nothing. Just that oppressive silence. Then I found the first carcass. A deer, or what was left of one. His body was torn open, ribcage exposed, organs missing. But there was no sign of scavengers. No flies, no maggots, nothing feeding on it. The blood was still fresh, dark and sticky in the dirt. My stomach tightened. I'd seen predator kills before, but this was different. It wasn't clean. It was vicious, done for sport, not for food. Something had torn this animal apart with unnatural aggression. I gripped my knife, more for comfort than anything else, and forced myself to move on. The forest started feeling claustrophobic. The trees pressed in on me, the light filtering through the canopy, turning everything a sickly shade of green. My breathing was louder than I wanted it to be. I adjusted my pack, tried to focus, but every instinct was screaming at me to turn back. Then I saw the second carcass, and the third, each one worse than the last. A raccoon, a fox, a coyote, bodies mutilated, insides hollowed out. No pattern, no logic, just senseless destruction. I clenched my jaw, my heart hammering in my chest. I had to get out of here. Now, I turned around, moving quickly, trying to retrace my steps. But something was wrong. The trail was gone. The path I had been following all day had disappeared. I stopped, took out my compass. North. I just had to keep heading north, and I'd hit the logging road eventually. I forced myself to keep moving. The silence felt heavier now, like the whole forest was holding its breath. And then, finally, a sound. A branch snapping somewhere behind me. My body froze. I turned slowly, scanning the trees. Nothing. Just shadows. Just my own paranoia. I picked up the pace, pushing through the undergrowth. Another sound. Closer. I didn't stop to look this time. I just ran. Branches whipped at my face. Thorns scraped my arms. My pack bounced against my back, the weight slowing me down. I didn't care. I had to get out. Another sound. Footsteps? Couldn't tell. My breath was coming in ragged gasps, my legs burning. I could feel something watching me, something following. And then, mercifully, I saw the road. It was just ahead, maybe 50 yards. I pushed myself harder, lungs screaming, muscles screaming. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see what was behind me. I broke through the last of the trees, stumbled onto the gravel, nearly collapsing. Silence. I turned, chest heaving, and stared back into the woods. Nothing. Just trees, stretching endlessly into the dark. Whatever had been there, whatever had been watching me, was gone. I didn't wait. I ran to my truck, fumbling for my keys, hands shaking. The second I was inside, I locked the doors, started the engine, and peeled out of there, tires kicking up dust and gravel. I didn't stop, didn't look back, just drove until I was miles away. I still don't know what I saw that day. I don't know what was out there. Maybe it was just my imagination running wild. Maybe I got turned around, let fear take over. But those tracks, those carcasses, I know what I felt. I'll never go back. I had always loved hiking alone. The quiet, the rhythm of my footsteps on dirt trails, the sense of being truly disconnected. It was something I needed. After working long hours at a job that drained the life out of me, these hikes were my way of resetting my mind. But there was one hike that changed the way I saw the wilderness forever. It was late September, just as summer was dying out and autumn was creeping in. The air was crisp but not too cold, the kind of weather that made hiking perfect. I had my backpack stocked with the essentials: water, some protein bars, a knife, a first aid kit, and my phone with a fully charged power bank. I wasn't reckless. I always made sure I was prepared. I chose a trail that wasn't well known. I had done my research and found a long, winding route through a dense section of forest that promised great views and a peaceful, solitary experience. The trail was roughly 12 miles, a loop that would bring me back to my car by evening if I kept a steady pace. The first few miles were everything I had hoped for. The forest was alive but not overwhelming. Birds chirped above, leaves rustled in the gentle breeze, and the occasional squirrel darted across the path. It was perfect. I took my time, stopping occasionally to take in the view when the trees opened up to reveal glimpses of distant mountains. About 5 miles in, I noticed the trail narrowing. The dirt path became rockier, and the trees seemed to grow closer together. There was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. The sounds of birds had faded, and the forest felt quieter, heavier. I didn't think much of it at first. I had been on plenty of trails where the density of trees muffled sound, but the silence stuck with me. Around mile 6, I came across something odd. A shoe. It was old, weathered, and half buried in the dirt. It looked like it had been there for years. At first, I assumed it was just some lost junk, but then I saw another one a few feet ahead, and then another. A trail of discarded shoes, all in different sizes, all facing the same direction. I told myself it was just weird litter. Maybe some campers had dumped their old shoes here for some reason. But something about it felt wrong. It was too deliberate. The shoes weren't scattered randomly. They formed a rough path leading deeper into the forest. I ignored them and kept walking. I wasn't here to dwell on mysteries. I just wanted to finish my hike and get back before dark. By mile 7, I realized I hadn't seen a single trail marker in a while. That was strange. The trail wasn't well maintained, but it was still a marked route. I backtracked a bit, scanning the trees for the usual blazes of paint that signified the correct path. Nothing. I pulled out my phone to check my GPS. No signal. That was expected. This deep into the Forest Service was spotty. I wasn't worried yet. I had a good sense of direction, and I knew if I just followed my own footprints back, I'd be fine. But as I turned to retrace my steps, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. My footprints were gone. The dirt was disturbed, sure, but not in a way that clearly showed my tracks. It was as if the forest had swallowed them up. A wave of unease settled in. I took a deep breath and forced myself to think rationally. Maybe the wind had shifted the top layer of dirt. Maybe the ground here was just too dry to hold proper tracks. I wasn't lost, I just needed to focus. I decided to keep moving forward, hoping I'd find another marker soon. But the deeper I went, the worse it got. The trees felt like they were closing in, and the silence was deafening. No birds, no wind, just my own breathing and the crunch of my boots on the forest floor. And then I saw it. A backpack, old, torn, slumped against the base of a tree. It had been there for a long time. The fabric was faded, and the zippers were rusted. I crouched down and nudged it with my foot. Empty. But next to it was something that sent a chill up my spine. An old water bottle, the kind with a flip-top lid, cracked and dry. And beside that, a rusted knife, its blade half buried in the dirt. I straightened up quickly. Something wasn't right. Someone had been here long ago, and they had left in a hurry. I kept moving faster now. My pulse was pounding in my ears, but I forced myself to stay calm. I needed to get out. I wasn't lost. I just had to find a trail marker, any marker. And then I heard it, a branch snapping, not far behind me. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. That wasn't an animal. It was deliberate, a slow, careful step. I turned my head slightly, just enough to glance over my shoulder without making it obvious. There was nothing there, just trees. But the feeling was undeniable. I wasn't alone. I picked up my pace, moving as quickly as I could without breaking into a run. Running was a bad idea. Running meant panic. Running meant noise. I needed to be quiet. Another sound. Closer. Not footsteps exactly, just movement. A shift in the air. The sense of something watching me, just beyond my line of sight. I gripped my knife in my pocket. I wasn't going down without a fight. Then, up ahead, something caught my eye. A bright orange ribbon tied to a tree. A marker. Relief flooded through me, but I didn't slow down. I moved straight toward it, then spotted another one a few feet ahead. The trail wasn't lost. I had just veered off course. I followed the markers, my heart pounding, my ears straining for any sound behind me. The presence I had felt was still there, but it wasn't following. It was just watching. I don't know how long it took, but eventually, I saw the break in the trees. The parking lot, my car. I didn't stop until I was inside, locking the doors the second I slammed them shut. I sat there for a long time, breathing hard, staring at the tree line. I didn't see anything, but I knew, deep down, that something had been there. Something had been watching me. I never went back to that trail, and I never hiked alone again. The wind was colder than I expected when I stepped out of my truck. The kind of cold that cuts straight through your jacket and makes you feel like you didn't dress warm enough. The sky was overcast, the kind of dull gray that promised rain but never quite delivered. I stood there for a moment, looking up at the towering trees lining the entrance of the trail. The forest felt different today, heavier, quieter. I chalked it up to my own nerves. I had done hikes like this before, but something about this one made my stomach tighten. I had planned this trip for weeks. A 2-day solo hike deep into the wilderness. A chance to clear my head and get away from everything. I had all the essentials in my pack: food, water, my tent, a knife, a fire starter, a GPS, and even a satellite phone just in case. Everything was set. But as I adjusted my backpack straps and took my first step onto the dirt trail, that uneasy feeling didn't go away. The first few miles were uneventful. Just me, the sound of my boots crunching against the dirt, and the occasional rustling of leaves as the wind whispered through the trees. The air was crisp, and the smell of damp earth filled my lungs. I tried to enjoy it, but the quiet was getting to me. Normally, a forest like this would be filled with sounds: birds, insects, the distant scurrying of small animals. But today there was almost nothing, just the occasional groan of the wind pushing through the trees. I pressed on, following the narrow trail as it wound deeper into the forest. I had checked the maps before coming out here, and I knew there were no official campsites. That was fine by me. I wanted to be alone. The farther I got from the main road, the more the silence wrapped around me. By the time I reached the place where I planned to set up camp, the sky had darkened. It wasn't sunset yet, but the clouds had thickened, making it feel later than it was. I found a small clearing off the trail, surrounded by trees that would block some of the wind. It wasn't perfect, but it would do. I set up my tent, made a small fire, and ate a quick meal. I should have felt at peace. This was exactly what I had come here for. But that feeling still lingered, gnawing at the back of my mind. The quiet felt unnatural. Even when I strained my ears, I heard nothing beyond the occasional rustle of leaves. No crickets, no owls, nothing. That night, sleep didn't come easy. The wind picked up, making the trees sway and groan, and every so often I'd hear something. A faint snap of a twig, a rustling in the brush. Probably just a deer or some other animal. But in the silence, every noise felt amplified. I kept my knife close, just in case. At some point, I must have dozed off because I woke up suddenly to a sound outside my tent. Not the wind, not an animal. Something deliberate. Footsteps. Slow, careful. I held my breath. Listened. Silence. For a long moment, I stayed still, every muscle in my body tense. Then, just when I started convincing myself I had imagined it, I heard it again. Another step. I grabbed my knife and flashlight, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't want to go outside, but I had to know what it was. I unzipped the tent just enough to peek out. My fire had burned down to embers, casting only a dim glow around the campsite. The trees stood still, dark and unmoving. Nothing. I scanned the area with my flashlight, my hand shaking slightly. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing only trees, rocks, and underbrush. No movement, no sign of anything. But the feeling in my gut told me something had been there, watching. I sat awake for the rest of the night, listening. But the sound didn't come again. Eventually, the exhaustion took over, and I drifted into an uneasy sleep. Morning came, gray and cold. I packed up quickly, deciding to cut my trip short. I didn't care if I was being paranoid. I just wanted out. As I made my way back to the trail, I felt it again. That presence. I couldn't see anything, couldn't hear anything, but I knew something was there. I walked faster, and then I saw it. About 50 feet off the trail, barely visible through the trees, something was hanging from a branch. At first, I thought it was just some trash caught in the wind, maybe an old piece of cloth. But as I got closer, I realized it was a bundle of sticks, carefully bound together with what looked like twine or animal sinew. I swallowed hard. Someone had put it there. A warning? A marker? I didn't know. I kept walking, my pulse hammering in my ears. Then I saw another one, and another, more of those strange bundles, hanging from trees at odd intervals along the trail. Some had bits of bone woven into them. Others had small carvings scratched into the wood. They hadn't been there when I hiked in. Someone had put them up overnight. Panic gripped my chest. I walked faster, almost breaking into a run. The forest seemed darker now, the trees pressing in closer. The silence was suffocating. Then I smelled it, rot, like something long dead. The wind shifted, carrying the stench through the trees, thick and putrid. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I just ran. I don't remember much of the rest of the hike back. Just the burning in my legs, the sound of my own ragged breathing, and the feeling that I wasn't alone. When I finally burst out of the trees and saw my truck, I nearly collapsed. I threw my pack into the back, jumped in, and locked the doors before I even caught my breath. I sat there for a long time, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my mind racing. I don't know who put those things in the trees. I don't know what they meant, but I do know one thing. I'll never go back to that forest again. I never thought I'd be the type of person to end up in a situation like this. I was always cautious, always the one to double-check locks, keep an eye on my surroundings, and never take unnecessary risks. But that night, none of that mattered. Because when you're out there, far from civilization and something or someone is watching you, all the precautions in the world won't save you. It started as a simple trip. Just a weekend away from the noise of the city, away from the stress of work. I had been working long hours, barely sleeping, living off takeout and caffeine. I needed a break, a reset. So when I found a cabin listed online, deep in the woods, it seemed like the perfect place to disconnect for a few days. The pictures showed a sturdy wooden structure, small but comfortable. There was a wood-burning stove, a small kitchen, and a bedroom with a large window that looked out into the forest. The description promised solitude, peace, and the kind of quiet you could only find far away from people. The drive out there was uneventful. Long stretches of road gave way to narrow, winding paths through dense trees. The further I drove, the fewer signs of life I saw. No gas stations, no stores, no houses. Just trees pressing in on both sides. The road turned to dirt, rough and uneven. My car wasn't built for off-roading, but I managed. Finally, I reached the cabin. It looked just like the pictures. A simple wooden structure, a small porch out front, a firewood stack neatly piled to one side. There were no other buildings in sight. No neighbors, no signs of anyone else around. I parked the car and grabbed my bags. The air was crisp, the scent of pine thick around me. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. It was small but cozy. Wooden walls, a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area. A single bedroom, a tiny bathroom. The kind of place you'd expect in the middle of nowhere. I set down my bags and took a deep breath. The silence was almost unsettling. No traffic, no voices, no distant hum of electricity. Just the wind moving through the trees and the occasional creak of the wooden floor as I walked. I spent the first few hours settling in, unpacking my things, checking the place out. There was no Wi-Fi, no cell service. That was part of the appeal. No distractions, no emails, no texts. Just me and the quiet. The first night was uneventful. I made a simple meal, sat by the fire, and read a book. The stillness of the place was strange at first, but after a while, I started to relax. I fell asleep early, the kind of deep sleep that comes when your body finally gets a break. I woke up to a sound. At first, I wasn't sure if I had imagined it. It wasn't loud, just a faint noise outside, a soft crunch like footsteps on leaves. I sat up, heart pounding. I listened. Nothing, just the wind. Maybe an animal, a deer, a raccoon, something harmless. I told myself it was nothing and went back to sleep. The next morning, I stepped outside and noticed something strange. Footprints. Not animal tracks. Footprints. Human. They led from the edge of the trees to the cabin, stopping just a few feet from the porch. My stomach tightened. I hadn't seen any other cabins, no hiking trails, no roads nearby. Who would be out here? I looked around, scanning the tree line. Nothing. Just trees stretching endlessly in every direction. I told myself they must have been old, maybe left by the owner or a previous renter. Still, I couldn't shake the unease that settled in my chest. I spent the day trying to distract myself. I chopped some wood, read, cooked, but every so often, I found myself glancing out the window, watching the trees. That night, I locked the door, not just the handle, but the deadbolt too. I closed the curtains, even though I knew no one should be out here. I lay in bed, listening, and then I heard it again. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, not close but not far, just outside the cabin. My heart pounded in my chest. I held my breath, straining to hear more. The footsteps stopped. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I checked outside. The footprints were back. This time, they were closer, leading right up to the porch. My stomach churned. I wasn't imagining this. Someone had been out there, walking around my cabin in the middle of the night, watching. I thought about leaving. I could pack my things, drive back to civilization. But I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe it was just a lost hiker. Maybe some hunter passing through. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I spent the day on edge. Every creak, every rustle of leaves made my skin crawl. The sun started to set, and I felt a deep sense of dread settle over me. I didn't want to be here anymore. I decided I'd leave in the morning. First light, I pack up and get out. That night, I didn't go to bed. I sat in a chair near the door, my heart hammering. Hours passed, nothing. And then, sometime past midnight, I heard it. A soft, slow creak. The sound of weight shifting on wood. The porch. Someone was on the porch. I held my breath. My mind raced. My car was outside, but the keys were in the kitchen. I'd have to move fast. Another creak. Then the sound of the doorknob turning. Slow testing. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it would burst from my chest. The door was locked, deadbolt, but that didn't matter if whoever was out there really wanted in. I reached for my bag, my hands shaking. I had a small hunting knife. It wasn't much, but it was something. The doorknob rattled again. Then silence. Minutes passed. I sat frozen, waiting, and then, slowly, the footsteps retreated. Down the porch, into the trees, gone. I didn't sleep. As soon as the sky started to lighten, I grabbed my things and bolted. I didn't care about breakfast, didn't care about checking the place over. I just grabbed my keys, threw my bag in the car, and sped down that dirt road as fast as I could without losing control. I didn't stop until I hit a main road, until I saw other cars, other people. Only then did I let out the breath I'd been holding. My hands were still shaking. I never found out who it was. The cabin owner said no one else had been out there. No other renters, no workers, no neighbors. Just me. I don't know if it was someone looking for a place to sleep or someone looking for something worse. I don't think I want to know. I never went back. I drove up to the cabin late in the afternoon, the sun already sinking low behind the trees. The road had been rough, miles of dirt and gravel, twisting through dense woods with no sign of another soul for at least an hour. It was exactly what I had been looking for. Isolation, quiet, a place where I could shut out the world and clear my head. The cabin itself was old but sturdy, a single-story structure with a small porch and a pitched roof weighed down by years of snow and rain. It had been sitting unused for a while, but the owner assured me it was in decent shape. The lock on the front door was rusted, and I had to shove my shoulder against the wood to get it open. Inside, the air was thick with dust, stale but not unbearable. A small kitchen, a living room with a stone fireplace, and a single bedroom with a creaky bed frame. It was simple, but it was all I needed. I dropped my bag near the door and went to open the windows. The forest stretched out in every direction, endless trees swaying in the wind. The quiet was unsettling at first, but I told myself I'd get used to it. I just needed time. By nightfall, I had unpacked, lit a fire, and settled in with a book. The wind howled outside, rattling the loose window panes, but inside was warm. The silence felt heavier now, pressing down in a way I couldn't quite explain. Every little sound, the pop of the fire, the creak of the wooden beams, felt too loud, like the whole cabin was holding its breath, waiting. I turned in early, but sleep didn't come easy. The mattress was stiff, the blankets smelled like mothballs, and every time I closed my eyes, I felt like I was being watched. I kept telling myself it was just my mind playing tricks, that it was normal to feel uneasy in a new place. But then, Just as I was starting to drift off, I heard it, a crunch outside, footsteps. My blood went cold. It was distinct, deliberate. Someone stepping on dried leaves just outside the bedroom window. I held my breath, listening. Nothing. The wind had died down, and the night was deadly still. I stayed frozen in bed for what felt like hours, waiting for another sound, some confirmation that I wasn't imagining things. But there was nothing. Eventually, exhaustion won, and I drifted into uneasy sleep. The next morning, I stepped outside, squinting against the sunlight. The ground was damp from dew, the leaves soft and undisturbed. No footprints, no sign that anyone had been near the cabin. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Maybe I had been hearing animals, a deer or a raccoon. I told myself not to let my mind get the best of me. The day passed quietly. I hiked a bit, chopped some wood, and tried to enjoy the solitude. But as the sun dipped behind the trees again, the same dread from the night before crept in. That heavy, suffocating silence. That feeling of not being alone. I double-checked the locks before bed, even wedged a chair under the doorknob. It made me feel better, even if I knew it wouldn't stop someone determined to get in. That night, I heard it again, closer this time. A slow, careful step just beyond the window. Then another, and another. I held my breath, my fingers clenched around the handle of a knife I had grabbed from the kitchen. The footsteps stopped. Silence stretched so long that I started to think I had imagined it. But then, soft and deliberate, the sound of breathing. Not mine. Right outside the thin wooden wall of the cabin. My mind raced. If I turned on the light, would they see me? If I moved, would they hear? I stayed frozen, my pulse hammering against my ribs. Then, as if whoever was out there had lost interest, the sound faded, the steps retreating into the woods. I didn't sleep after that. I stayed awake, knife in hand, listening, waiting. By morning, I had convinced myself to leave. I packed quickly, stuffing my things into my bag, barely caring if I forgot anything. But when I stepped outside, my stomach turned to ice. Footprints, clear, fresh prints in the dirt just outside my window. Not the broad, heavy marks of boots. Bare feet, human. Who the hell was out here walking barefoot in the middle of nowhere? I backed toward my car, every nerve in my body screaming at me to move faster. The moment I unlocked the door, I heard it, a rustling in the trees, a low, deliberate breath, not from the wind or an animal. Someone was watching. I threw my bag into the passenger seat and slammed the door. The engine roared to life, and I hit the gas, gravel spitting out behind me as I sped down the dirt road. I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I was miles away, back on the highway, surrounded by cars and streetlights and the comforting hum of civilization. I never told anyone what happened. Not the police, not the owner of the cabin. What would I even say? That I heard something? That I felt watched? That I found footprints where no one should have been? It's been months, but I still think about it. Late at night, when the house is quiet, I hear the echoes of those footsteps. I feel the weight of unseen eyes, and I know, somewhere out there in those woods, something was watching me. And maybe, just maybe, it still is. I woke up to the sound of rain. Hard, steady drops hitting the roof of the cabin. The kind of rain that turns dirt roads into deep mud and makes the air thick with the smell of wet wood. I had come out here alone, needing a break from the city, from the noise, from people. The cabin belonged to a friend of a friend, an old hunting lodge deep in the woods, no neighbors for miles. I had packed enough food for a week, a rifle in case of animals, and a satellite phone in case of emergencies. I thought I was prepared. The first few days were peaceful. I spent my time hiking, reading, chopping wood. At night, I listened to the sounds of the forest. Owls, crickets, the occasional rustle of something moving through the underbrush. The isolation felt good, like a reset. But by the fourth day, I started feeling uneasy. It was small things at first. The sense of being watched when I stepped outside. A strange stillness in the air, like the woods were holding their breath. I told myself it was paranoia, just my mind adjusting to the silence. But then I found the tracks. They were in the mud just behind the cabin. Large, deep impressions, not like anything I'd seen before. Not boots, not bare, not anything I could recognize. They circled the cabin, leading from the tree line, stopping just beneath my bedroom window. I felt my stomach drop. Someone had been watching me while I slept. I spent the rest of the day checking my surroundings, looking for signs of whoever left those tracks. The rain had wiped away most of the details, but I could tell they weren't old. I kept my rifle close that night, listening for anything unusual. Around midnight, I heard it. The crunch of footsteps on wet leaves, slow, deliberate. Not an animal. I turned off the cabin lights and sat in the darkness, heart pounding. The footsteps circled the cabin once, then stopped. Silence. I waited for what felt like hours, barely breathing. Nothing. Eventually, I fell into a light, uneasy sleep. The next morning, I found more tracks, closer this time, and something else. A dead rabbit on my porch, its throat slit clean. I locked the cabin door and checked the rifle, making sure it was loaded. I wasn't alone out here. I tried calling for help, but the satellite phone wouldn't connect. Storm interference, I told myself. I decided to pack up and leave. But when I went outside to load my truck, I saw it. The tires were slashed. Someone had taken a knife to all four. Panic set in. I was trapped. I spent the day barricading the windows and doors, stacking furniture, making sure nothing could get in. I kept the rifle close, listening for any movement. As the sun went down, the woods felt even darker than before. I sat in the center of the cabin, back to the wall, watching the door. The hours dragged on. At some point, exhaustion took over, and I dozed off. I woke up to the creak of a floorboard. My blood went cold. The door was still locked, the windows still shut, but someone was inside. The air felt heavy, charged. I gripped the rifle, trying to control my breathing. Another creak, closer this time. Then silence. I didn't move, didn't blink. My eyes adjusted to the darkness, searching the shadows. Nothing, but I could feel it. Someone watching, waiting. I gripped the rifle tighter. Minutes passed, then an hour. I stayed frozen, muscles screaming. Finally, as dawn began to break, the feeling lifted. Whoever or whatever had been inside was gone. I didn't waste time. As soon as it was light, I grabbed my bag and started walking. I didn't care how far the nearest road was. I just needed to get out. I moved fast, checking over my shoulder every few minutes, the rifle ready. The woods were silent. No birds, no wind, nothing. Just my own footsteps. I walked for hours, legs burning, lungs aching. Then I saw it, another cabin. Small, rundown. I hesitated. If whoever had been watching me was still out here, I might be walking into another trap. But I couldn't keep wandering. I needed shelter, a phone, something. The door was unlocked. Inside, dust covered everything. It looked abandoned. I searched quickly, no phone, no food, just old furniture and broken windows. Then I saw the wall, scratched into the wood, dozens of names, some old, some fresh. And beneath them, a single message: "Don't stay after dark." A shiver ran down my spine. My name wasn't on the wall, but I knew if I stayed, it would be. I turned and ran. Ran until my legs gave out, until I stumbled onto a dirt road and flagged down the first car I saw. I didn't stop to explain. I just left. Days later, after I made it back to the city, I looked up missing persons reports from that area. There were too many. Hikers, campers, hunters, people who went into those woods and never came out. I don't know what I saw out there. I don't want to know, but I'll never go back. I needed to get away. Too many things in life were piling up, and I felt like I was drowning in it all. So, I found this cabin online, deep in the woods, far from everything. It wasn't fancy, just a basic wooden structure with a tin roof, a small deck, and a single chimney. No internet, no neighbors, no distractions. Exactly what I needed. The listing had mentioned it was a bit rustic, but that was fine. I wasn't looking for luxury. I wanted silence, a place where I could breathe. Getting there was more of a hassle than I expected. The drive alone took 6 hours, half of which was on back roads with no signs, just a GPS signal that flickered in and out. Then, the final stretch was a dirt path, barely wide enough for my car, winding through dense forest. Trees pressed in on both sides, their branches clawing at my windows like skeletal fingers. I hadn't seen another car for miles, and that was fine. It was what I wanted. Isolation. The cabin sat in a small clearing, a single-story structure with weathered wood and a sloping roof. There was a shed out back, which the owner said had firewood and some tools if I needed them. No electricity, just a generator, and no running water except for an old well. The place smelled like damp wood and old dust when I first stepped inside, but it was sturdy, functional. The front door creaked when I closed it, the sound too loud in the stillness. I set my bags down and took a look around. One main room with a bed pushed against the wall, a small wood-burning stove, and a battered table with 2 chairs. A narrow doorway led to a tiny bathroom with a bucket system for water. No mirrors in the entire place, which felt odd, but I shrugged it off. The only light came from a few old oil lamps, their glass smudged with years of soot. It wasn't exactly cozy, but I hadn't come here for comfort. That first night, I sat on the porch and listened to the silence. No cars, no voices, no hum of electricity. Just the sound of the wind threading through the trees and the distant hoot of an owl. I felt something loosen in my chest. This was good. This was what I needed. I slept lightly, waking up to every creak and groan of the cabin settling. At one point, I swore I heard something outside, footsteps in the dirt, but when I looked out the window, there was nothing. Just trees swaying in the dark, their branches scraping against one another. Probably just a deer, maybe a raccoon. I told myself not to be paranoid. The next day, I explored a little. There was an overgrown path leading away from the cabin, so I followed it, stepping over fallen branches and pushing through thick brush. It led to a small stream, its water dark and still. No fish, no ripples, just motionless water reflecting the trees like a mirror. I crouched down and reached in, but the water was strangely warm, like it had been sitting in the sun too long. A rotten smell clung to the air, something foul beneath the surface. I didn't linger. On my way back, I spotted something just off the path. A piece of wood, half buried under leaves. I brushed the dirt away and realized it was part of an old sign. The letters faded but still readable. Keep out. The edges were splintered, like it had been ripped off whatever post it had been nailed to. My stomach tightened. The listing hadn't mentioned anything about private land or warnings. Maybe it was old. Maybe it didn't mean anything anymore. I left it where it was and walked back to the cabin. That night, the noises came back. Soft at first, almost like whispers in the wind, but then footsteps. Not the random rustling of an animal, but slow, deliberate steps circling the cabin. I stayed still, heart hammering in my chest, listening. They stopped at the front door. A long pause, then a quiet, almost hesitant knock. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The knock came again, louder this time. My brain scrambled for an explanation. A lost hiker? Some local checking in? But who would be out here at this hour? The listing had said the nearest town was over 20 miles away. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The footsteps retreated, fading into the woods. I waited, muscles tense, but nothing happened. After a long time, I let out a shaky breath and forced myself to lie back down. Sleep didn't come easily. The next morning, I found footprints in the dirt outside. Human footprints. They circled the cabin, stopping just short of the porch steps. My stomach twisted. Maybe someone had been here. Maybe they'd left. Either way, I didn't want to stick around to find out. I packed my things quickly, stuffing everything into my bag with shaking hands. I didn't even bother eating. I just wanted to be gone. But when I tried to start my car, nothing happened. The engine clicked but wouldn't turn over. My breath came in short gasps. I tried again. Nothing. I popped the hood, but I didn't know what I was looking at. It had worked fine when I got here. This didn't make sense. I needed to leave. I grabbed my phone, but of course no signal. I tried the generator, but it sputtered and died. The nearest town was too far to walk in a single day, and I had no idea if there were any other cabins nearby. I felt trapped. I spent the next few hours pacing, trying to think. Maybe if I followed the dirt road back, I'd find someone. Maybe I'd just have to walk until I got service. But as the day stretched on, a new thought settled in. Someone had been here last night, and they hadn't knocked to ask for help. The sun started dipping below the trees, shadows stretching long across the clearing. I forced myself to stay calm. I locked the doors. I took one of the old knives from the kitchen and sat on the bed, gripping it tight. The night was coming, and I wasn't ready for it. When the knocking came again, I nearly dropped the knife. 3 sharp raps against the wood, then silence. I didn't move. The door handle rattled, then the back door, then the windows. Slow, methodical testing, looking for a way in. I stayed awake all night, listening. They never broke in. They never spoke, but they were there, just outside, just beyond the thin walls of the cabin, waiting. By morning, they were gone. The footprints in the dirt were deeper this time, like someone had stood there for hours. My car still wouldn't start. My supplies were running low. I needed to leave, so I walked. I grabbed my bag, my knife, and started down the road. Every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves made my skin crawl. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone, but the road was empty, just me and the trees. It took me 6 hours to reach a gas station. When I stumbled inside, the cashier looked up, startled. I must have looked like hell. I asked for a phone, called a tow truck, and sat there shaking while I waited. I didn't tell anyone what happened, not because I didn't believe it, but because I did. Because I knew somewhere deep in those woods they were still there, waiting for the next person to come looking for silence. I woke up to the sound of branches scraping against the window. The wind had picked up overnight, and now the whole cabin creaked around me. It wasn't much of a cabin, just a one-room shack with a small bathroom attached, deep in the woods. The place was old, and it smelled like damp wood and dust. It belonged to my uncle, who had let me borrow it for a weekend. I just needed to get away, clear my head. Too much stress, too much city noise. Out here it was quiet, but maybe too quiet. I rubbed my eyes and glanced at the old clock on the wall. 3:12 a.m. The wind howled outside, and I pulled the blankets tighter around me. I had locked the door before bed. I knew that for sure. The only way in or out was the front door, and I had checked it twice. The single window had a rusty old latch that barely moved. No one was getting in. Still, I felt uneasy. It was that kind of fear that sat heavy in your chest. A slow-burning panic that made no sense but refused to go away. I listened. The wind howled again, but beneath it, there was something else. A soft crunching sound. Footsteps. I held my breath, listening harder. Maybe it was a deer or some other animal. Maybe it was nothing, but it didn't stop. It sounded slow, deliberate. Not the skittering of a raccoon or the careless steps of a deer. I reached for my flashlight, but my hand was shaking. I forced myself to breathe, told myself it was fine, probably just the wind knocking loose branches around. I turned on the flashlight and aimed it toward the window. The beam bounced off the glass, reflecting back at me. Outside, the trees swayed wildly, their shadows stretching across the ground like twisted fingers. But I didn't see anything. Then, just as I was about to turn away, I saw it, a figure, standing just beyond the tree-line. I froze. My breath hitched in my throat. It was too far to see clearly, but it was there. Person, just standing there, unmoving. A shiver ran down my spine. My brain scrambled for a reasonable explanation. A lost hiker? Someone camping nearby? But this deep in the woods? And why were they just standing there? I turned off the flashlight. My heart pounded as I slowly backed away from the window. I didn't want whoever was out there to know I had seen them. I stood in the darkness, waiting. The wind kept howling, but the footsteps had stopped. I strained to hear anything, but the only thing I could make out was the creaking of the cabin. I waited for what felt like hours. Nothing happened. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe the shadows had played tricks on me. But then, just as I was starting to calm down, I heard it. The door handle. It rattled softly just once. Then silence. I couldn't move. My body locked up, every muscle tensed. Someone was out there, and they were trying to get in. I slowly reached for the small hunting knife I had brought with me. My uncle had warned me about bears, but now I was wishing he had warned me about something worse. Another rattle, harder this time. I clenched the knife tighter. The door was locked. I knew that, but what if the lock wasn't strong enough? What if they had a crowbar? What if... Then suddenly the noise stopped. I stood there waiting, but nothing happened. No footsteps, no more rattling. Just the wind. I wanted to move closer to the door, but fear kept me frozen. What if they were still there, just waiting for me to make a sound? Minutes passed, then hours. The clock read 5:47 a.m. when I finally moved. The first light of dawn was creeping through the trees, and the fear that had gripped me all night had started to loosen. I had to check. I had to know if someone had really been there. I forced myself to the door. My fingers trembled as I reached for the lock. I took a deep breath and unlocked it, then slowly cracked the door open. The cold morning air hit me first. The wind had died down, and the woods were silent. But then I saw it. Footprints. They led from the treeline to my door. Deep, heavy prints in the damp earth. Someone had been there, and they had stood at my door for a long time. But there was something worse. The footprints didn't lead away. Whoever it was, they never left. I slammed the door shut and locked it again. My stomach twisted, my mind racing. I grabbed my bag, my car keys, and everything I could carry. I wasn't staying another minute. I threw open the door and ran to my car, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. I fumbled with the keys, desperate to get inside. When the engine roared to life, I felt a surge of relief so strong I almost cried. I hit the gas and sped down the narrow dirt road, not daring to look in the rearview mirror. I never told my uncle what happened. Never told anyone. I don't know who was out there that night. I don't know what they wanted, and I don't ever want to find out.